will now allow this in our country. We are here to fight, and we will fight until we have someone who will represent us. And when I say us, I mean everyone here in the Commonwealth.
Ladies and gentlemen all over the world, you are tuning into the one and the only A Difference in Thought. I'm your host, Charlie Ray, and for those of you who are listening for the first time, or maybe you've been a faithful listener, Difference in Thought engages and processes current events, culture, philosophy, public policy, and faith through the ancient art of truth-telling. Join the conversation and gain an alternative perspective with a difference in thought. This podcast is in honor and homage of the work and mission of the great Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. right up above me. The core mantra and philosophy of this podcast is that basic arithmetic teaches us that there can be no difference without subtraction. Before first considering where you would like to see a difference, consider where you are willing to take a subtraction. You are tuned into Season 2, Episode number 3, Birth of the Commonwealth, Blackface, Klan Politics, and Why Governor Northam Must Resign. Now, if any of you all have news platforms of any kind, I'm sure you've heard of the sheer turmoil and just craziness that has been the last 4 days here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And this is going to be a unique perspective because I'm a trust builder and a community organizer here, and so we're going to get into some of the histories and some of the other factors that you need to consider and why there's been such uproar about Ralph Northam needing to resign. And so when you want to understand why did I choose the title Birth of the Commonwealth? Well, what people are not talking about is the history of blackface and its connection with what I call Klan politics, which I will talk about a little bit later. And Birth of the Commonwealth, it's a play on a movie called Birth of the Nation, which kind of is an embodiment and an eerie similarity to what is happening here in Virginia ever since those pictures surfaced. Now, before I get into the nitty-gritty and the details and the worst press conference probably in the last decade, right? I want to talk about how we're going to frame this conversation. So, for those who've been listening, if you listen to Season 1 and you listen to the episode Black Careers Matter, we talked about the difference between intent versus impact, where some people say that, oh, I'm not racist, I'm not whatever, I have however black friends, and so versus the intent versus the impact, and how disparate impact can happen even though people have the best of intent. And we always talk about Dr. King in the later part of his life in 67 and 68, where he started saying that as a civil rights movement and as a people, we have to move beyond just saying that racism is reserved for Klan members and acts of violence against black people, even though that is very still true today as we see the hate crime that was committed against Jussie Smollett. But he's had to talk about it's not just those blatant acts, but there is economy and public policy and a way of locking black people out of power that also is racist. And that's when he started saying that moved from civil rights to probably what John Hope Brown would call the civil rights movement. It talks about economic investment that matched the type of investment that America was giving to the West and the Midwest, but locking black people out of that. If you want to know more about that, read a book called The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein. And actually, we can talk about this transition of our mentality when we're talking about who's racist. We can't just talk about the blatant, overt optics of racism or the language of racism, but we have to talk about the impact of racism and the outcomes of that and how they can change across that. So one thing that Whitney Young would talk about, Whitney Young would say in his book To Be Equal, he talked about that that despite the update and polite discourse, for him it was segregation of schools. There was a time where people would say, "Oh, I don't like black kids in with these white kids, and let's keep the race, so keep kids segregated." Or if someone says, "Oh, I don't think it's good for the Negro child, so let's keep them separated." Or I don't think they just do well; they do better with their kind. But at the end of the day, no matter what those various spectrums of intent were, the result was the same impact: black people being left out of schools that were properly funded. And so with that to say, before we have this conversation, I want you to begin to think about what is racism and what I call Klan politics. Now, what is about Klan politics? And we'll talk about this too, where the Klan was ex-Confederate soldiers who, during the time of Reconstruction, wanted to wear hoods that looked like ghosts because of the ghosts of Confederacy that were kind of seeking revenge on this America during Reconstruction, where you had people like Benjamin Franklin, Randolph, and other black citizens who had black political power after slavery and were able to exercise political power, the type of black power that Stokely Carmichael and Fannie Lou Hamer actually talked about. And so Klan politics, for the use of this conversation, is where we're talking about the type of politics and policy decisions and social movements that look to disenfranchise or suppress or keep black people out of leadership. The type of Fannie Lou Hamer talked about it in an interview. She said that it's not that this Klan politic doesn't move like it did back in the day. It's not going to be a white mob surrounding you and lynching you, right? It's going to be not giving people jobs or not having health care or food. Or as beautifully stated by Coretta Scott King, or Queen King. She has a great quote which I want to set the context of this conversation in before we get into Governor Northam. Okay. Coretta Scott King says, "I must remind you that starving a child is violence. Neglecting school children is violence. Punishing a mother and her family is violence. Discrimination against a working man is violence. Ghetto housing is violence. Ignoring medical need is violence. Contempt for poverty is violence." Now, Coretta Scott King is talking about this violence that happens without a fist being thrown, without a white mob forming, kind of what Fannie Hamer was talking about. But she's talking about this too is violence, or as for the sake of this conversation, this is the type of movement that we call Klan politics. So I want you to keep that in mind as we're talking about the events that have happened with Governor Northam, okay? And then we're going to kind of talk about the history of blackface. So first of all, let's get into it for those who have been under a rock, or maybe you don't live in the Commonwealth of Virginia, so you don't know what's happening. So right about Friday night, a story broke from a, I guess, conservative right-wing news source, right, that showed a picture on Ralph Northam's medical school notebook, yearbook, a picture on his page. Now, one is him with a car that he finished, and another one is just, two random pictures, him and some friends. But then there's a picture of someone in full body blackface, picture with someone who's in a Ku Klux Klan robe, and it's right under there for the governor. So the news breaks, and then that Friday night, Ralph Northam comes out, and he says, "I'm sorry for, for the way that I was seen portrayed in that picture. I'm sorry for it. I apologize. I know that it is hurtful and harmful to people of color, and I apologize," and X, Y, Z. So goes to sleep. Guess he thinks the apology is going to work. I get up and I'm seeing this at night, and then I found out some friends of mine were organizing to go to the governor's mansion to call for him to resign. So I got up that morning to, anticipating that obviously this person's going to resign. But lo and behold, it turns out this guy's saying he's not going to resign. And so everyone's saying, like, why in the world wouldn't his brother resign? Like, obviously, that's unacceptable, you know. That's pretty blatant textbook racism 101. I mean, forget Klan politics. You're actually in Klan robes, right? So he gets up in the morning, and he has this press conference. Now, this press conference is so terrible that I am going to now go into the portion of the show that everybody knows and loves, called Do Better Baby. Now, Ralph comes on. Now, instead of him saying, you know, this is hurtful, and since this is, you know, right on the tails of Charlottesville, and since if, you know, this was hidden in the election, if people had a choice, they probably would not have voted for me, I'm going to go ahead and step down and let Lieutenant Governor Fairfax come in and take the reins, and I'm just going to slide out here. He then comes in and says, that's not me in the picture. Even though last night he had just said, I was in the picture. And though I even though that's, you know, terrible, I wish I was the only thing that he said. He then comes of his own volition and says, that's not me in that month of 1984, because that same year I was in San Antonio and I did a dance competition and I darkened my face and used shoe polish, and then he says, I only use a little bit because for those of you who don't know, right, apparently he's an expert in blackface. He says, shoe polish is really hard to get off, so only put a little bit on for a Michael Jackson costume. One, that's problematic because black people's faces, our skin is not costume, right? And you can talk about performative blackness where, you know, appropriation, where I put on blackness to perform and win something, and then when it's done, I just erase it, and then I go back to my whiteness, right? So a prime example of that, Miley Cyrus, I don't want to be Disney girl anymore. I'm going to appropriate twerking and all in this type of dancing. But then when I'm back on, then I'm going singing fake country music with Mark Ronson because it worked for Lady Gaga, right? But, you know, disassociating with that, right? So there's a performative blackness that's saying, hey, we are a people, not a costume, right? This is not something that you put on and act for to get where you want to go, and then you leave those initiatives to the side. So, whatever. So then he dons this, and he dances, and he still brings up the point that he won the contest. Like, it's something as somehow it's still something he's kind of proud of. Like, if I wanted, this brother still has the trophy from it, right, hanging in his house or whatever. And he goes on and says, well, then I talked to my friend Seth, which I've discovered, by the way, isn't his friend, but it's his young African-American driver that actually is the person. So he has his black driver tell him, yo, that blackface is messed up, right? And then he kind of goes and says, you know, but, you know, it's not as bad as the blackface, whatever. And then he even says, like, I don't believe it's me, and all these types of things where it can't be me, and all these types of things, and saying he'll use facial recognition even though somebody's in a hood, right? Which is like, brother, what? And then comes probably the cardinal offense in all of this. A reporter asks him, right after he got a question of, do you understand why blackface is problematic? And he's like, oh yes, it's super hurtful for people of color, all these types of things. And then he kind of says, well, I'm not responsible for coons, man. Two older classmen called me coons, man, and it just stuck with me. Even though in the yearbook, you get to select what name you put in. So no matter how we got it, he said, I want to be known by coons, man. And when people look back on my medical process, I want them to know that Big Ralph went by coons, man, right? So he has that put in there. And then someone asks him, you say in the contest you were moonwalking. So are you able to still moonwalk? This fool looks at the floor like, oh, I wonder if I got enough space, right? And he starts laughing, and his wife says, in inappropriate circumstances. And he says, oh, my wife says inappropriate circumstances, like party pooper, Big Ralph's about to give y'all the moonwalk of your life, right? So that is despicable, right? And here's the thing that I want to talk about too, is I want to talk about competence and leadership, okay? Virginia has been going through a process where Charlottesville happened. We had someone who was running on very xenophobic, almost racist type of rhetoric in Corey Stewart in a Senate race. The person he beat to be governor was campaigning with Trump and all these other types of things, right? And so we have this high, and we're on the 400-year mark of the first enslaved Africans being trafficked here in Virginia and the United States as a whole. It's the 400-year mark of this. So with all of this culminating around, we need a leader that is competent and is able to understand, number one, this is not a joke. Obviously, dancing at a press conference where you're talking about blackface is terrible. Not understanding what Koonsman means, right, is terrible. And he lacks the competence to lead in the era that Virginia is in right now. So that alone is reason for why he should resign. Let me tell you why it is worse that this man was dancing in blackface than just taking a picture, because here we're going to talk about the connection now between blackface and what I like to call Klan politics. And if you remember what I broke down, it's about discrimination, dehumanization, and disenfranchisement and suppression of black political power. Okay, so blackface. Now, many of you have known what is called Jim Crow laws, and they were segregation. They were pretty much came out of after the decision, Plessy versus Ferguson, that says you can have separate but equal. It was this type of segregation and also these rules of law that kind of undid what you had, the progress that you had in Reconstruction, where people like a black United Methodist minister named Benjamin Franklin Randolph was able to become a senator and a representative, and he was, he passed laws such as why we have public education, why people who don't own land are able to vote, even though unfortunately he left women out of that. These types of initiatives actually were done by and led by black senators during the time of Reconstruction after the Civil War. And so Jim Crow laws came to disenfranchise that power, but you have to understand how did these people go from having power to not having power. So Jim Crow actually was done by a white playwright who put on blackface and created a character named Jim Crow to dehumanize black people and to mock them and to make them look lazy and despicable and kind of like the young buck and the sexual buck who's always just has their mind on sex and would rape and all these other types of things, right? The worst stereotypes and stigma. It was done by Jim Crow, by this white person pretending to be a black person in blackface named Jim Crow, and he would dance to a song called Jump Jim Crow. So it's what was known as minstrel acts, right? And so the Jim Crow led to such dehumanization that when they decided to make a law to strip away the power of black people, they called it Jim Crow laws, because the mentality that of how they view black people came from this play and this mockery of singing and dancing and all these negative stereotypes, and that's how they justified Jim Crow laws coming to play. So the fact that you have someone like Ralph Northam, the top legislator in top office in the land of Virginia, confessing that he performed a Jim Crow style minstrel show while he's residing over certain decisions that affect black communities, like the pipeline going through Union Hill that the Dominion's behind, and the fact that he had taken two people who opposed this pipeline off of the board to be able to vote against it. And this is a type of pipeline that is known for potentially having explosions and could really displace and harm people. And the fact that it's going through a neighborhood like Union Hill and affecting black people there, that is the type that is with such erosion of trust that you've done a minstrel blackface in the form that past legislation that has disenfranchised black people has taken place. You have to understand why that's problematic and why people cannot trust you in that position. And the fact that you still brag that you won it, and the fact that you were willing to moonwalk, and the fact that you didn't do more shoe pilots out of respect just because it's harder to take off, meaning that if shoe pilots wasn't so darn hard to take off, I would have looked like the person in the, alleged photo. So seeing this connection between the blackface and the Klan politics, and one of the historical items that really illustrate this connection between dehumanization and black political power and Klan politics is a movie back in 1915 that was entitled The Birth of a Nation. Now, some of you are always saying, "Oh, Birth of a Nation, where have I heard that?" Well, it was remade recently, Birth of a Nation, to actually tell the story of Nat Turner, a black slave who rebelled. But the original The Birth of a Nation, actually was written by a person who written by a director that wanted to change how the North viewed the end of the Civil War. So this movie, which is crazy, the bad guys in this movie are literally white people dressed in blackface, making this connection now, displaying the newly elected black people who were then elected during Reconstruction. So people like Benjamin Franklin Randolph are displayed, right, as white people in blackface, and they're got their feet kicked up on the desks, and they've got fried chicken and watermelon, all the type of stereotypes that they're there. And the beginning look is look at these black people in power, and they're degrading and dirtying up Congress, and this is wrong, and this needs to be kind of dealt with. And the other villain in the movie, which is kind of crazy with how what's going on in Virginia, is actually a black lieutenant governor. I can't make this stuff up, guys. Is a black lieutenant governor. And so the whole plot of the movie is how the Klan reassembles to lynch a black man, black man, but of course it's a white person in blackface who attempts to rape a woman, and so the Klan is seen as the hero who comes in and lynches this person. And at the end of the movie, the solution to this problem of all this black legislative power and this black lieutenant governor, right? The solution is that the Klan on election day surround the houses of black people and surround polling places with guns and with an intimidation, and then the black people are so scared for their life, and due to the violence of lynching, they do not come out to vote. And so at the end, they are able to the black people kind of forsake their power because they don't go out and vote because they're scared of being lynched. And the Klan is able to intimidate black people out of power and then restore back the white Congress, and and then someone from the North and someone from the South, they marry each other, and kind of saying, yes, the North and the South are united due to their superior Aryan race, and all this other type of things like that. And so you have to understand that the violence of after Reconstruction was very much real, and it was not a fictional thing. So these are kind of an account of how the Klan violence led to political power of white people, right, and the disenfranchisement of black people. And so blackface is all throughout this movie. And here's something that you need to understand. Now, the director was getting censored by some groups, by the NAACP and some other places, who were saying like, this is a violent film, this is historically inaccurate, this is going to cause race riots and mobs by white people and things like that, right? And so let me understand the implications of this film that features blackface, features Klan violence, features the foundations of the Klan politics that we're talking about. So throughout this movie, so after this movie, the director is like, man, I'm getting boycotted. So how can I make the public more at ease about this film? And so he decides, because he went to Johns Hopkins University, right? Though he didn't study medicine, he studied history and politics. One of his classmates was Woodrow Wilson, who was president at the time. So Woodrow Wilson, he goes and shows this movie to Woodrow Wilson. The president of the United States is showing this movie with blackface and Klan violence and Klan politics, and it's disputed about whether Woodrow Wilson actually stated this or not, but it is rumored that he said that it was teaching history with lightning, right? As in him saying that, man, this is so true and so electrifying to see it on film. Some people are saying that he was just speaking about using film to teach history is the technique of that. But anyways, Woodrow Wilson sees it. Problem with Woodrow Wilson is that Woodrow Wilson actually segregated and allowed Jim Crow laws to segregate all federal positions in his cabinet, so that, and it's the first time that he did it since the Civil War or anything. So he actually segregated and kicked black people out of his federal cabinets, right? So he shows this to Woodrow Wilson, right? And so you see this connection with blackface and then with the disenfranchisement of black people. Not only does he show it to Woodrow Wilson, he goes to the Chief Supreme Court Justice. And I'll see if I can find his name here. But this guy goes to the Chief Supreme Court Justice and shows it to him. And here's the thing, and which is which is insane. He brings it to the Chief Supreme Court Justice. The Chief Supreme Court Justice hears about the film and says, I'm a member of the Klan. So here you see, the director of this film is actually behind of how the Klan has transitioned to not only just Klan violence, but Klan politics. But you have the Chief Supreme Court Justice of this time tells the director, yo, I'm in the Klan. I'm down for the cause. And this Chief Supreme Court Justice actually voted to uphold Plessy versus Ferguson, which allowed segregation under the guise of separate but equal. And so here the Klan had already gone from violence to Klan politics to disenfranchisement of black people, to the point that the director who made this film gets put up on game and is like, oh shoot, so you're a Klan member, you're the Chief Supreme Court Justice? So this guy says, yeah, I'm part of the Klan. So then he gets all the other Supreme Court justices to watch this film. He also, and this was shown at the National Press Club. He then gets 38 senators, 50 representatives, members of the Supreme Court, and the Secretary of the Navy, right, and the running mate of, and the governor of California, all see this film. Even have reverends seeing this film, saying that the story is told by the pictures is true. I'm ready to swear on the Bible, right? And after he shows the film, 22 members of Congress then send voluntary letters of enthusiastic commendation, pretty much praising this movie. And so you see this connection between blackface that's used in this movie, the violence and also at the end of 1915, the Klan actually reassembled and got a surge from this movie. And so during this movie, black people white mobs would go and beat up black people, apparently Liam Neeson style, right? That's another whole crazy thing. And And at one point, a white person was so mad that they shot a gun at the film at one of the white people in blackface. And so this violence surged this thing up. And it not only just led from a film, it also led into political decisions and policy making to disenfranchise black people. So I say all of that to get you to understand the fact that the current 2019 Governor of Virginia donned blackface and performed a Jim Crow style minstrel show is now asking black people in Virginia to trust him over the very important legal and legislative proceedings that we have to undo the history of the past. How can we trust you to undo the history of the past when you wear the garb and you adopt the Klan politics of the past that we are trying to undo? That is unacceptable, and that is not what Virginia needs at this time in history. And for that reason, Ralph Northam needs to resign. It is insane when you understand this very connection that I laid out for you, that we can't do that. And Ralph Northam, I've heard him say it so many times. Well, I got Barbara Johns and Oliver Hill hanging up in my governor's mansion, but as Brother Gary Flowers told me, he didn't put them there. But when there was a chance to support another young lady who said that state funding for African Americans is too low, Governor Northam wasn't there at the March for More campaign, and he wasn't there at the Red for Ed campaign. He also just last Halloween dressed up as a Virginia governor who owned slaves, right? And when he was campaigning with Lieutenant Governor Fairfax, he left his name, Lieutenant Governor Fairfax's name, off of the campaign paraphernalia when he was campaigning in white neighborhoods, because he didn't want in white neighborhoods to be associated with black people, right? And now he's ignoring the voices and even sabotaging a lot of the environmental justice people who have been saying this pipeline is not helpful. And even the Dominion projects that are happening in Navy Hill, right? Ignoring the black communities surrounding those. My question is not what mask did he wear in 1984. The question is, what mask is he wearing today? Because though he may not don the robes, the hoods of the Klan, he is donning the politics of the Klan. And just as the director of Birth of a Nation found out that the Klan traded in hoods for robes, Governor Northam has been operating in a very problematic way where he has adopted Klan politics. And he's now asking us to trust him with more time in Klan politics when he has donned and performed and was willing to perform again the same type of minstrel show that preceded and made room for the type of disenfranchisement that we're trying to fight here in the Commonwealth. So Ralph Northam absolutely must resign. And to give you more information about what I'm talking about as far as the intersection between racism and environmental racism, I ran into some organizers who work with environmental justice, because they were there for the Red for Ed March, and they were saying, not to view the Northams as a ally for that and ignore what they've been doing on the environmental racism side. And I'll also show you some footage of when I went to join the protest to call Northam to resign in this edition of A Difference in Resistance. I'll see you back after this.
Now! 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 Blackface! No place! 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 Blackface! No place!
We are organizers with the Virginia Student Environmental Coalition. Most of our work surrounds the pipeline and the Coliseum.
Yes.
But our politics are very intersectional in nature, and so what draws a lot of us to fighting the pipeline and Coliseum is the racial injustice and racial discrimination we see at play there, and the system of exploitation. And the school system today was, for us, not just about a labor movement for educators. I work as a teacher and have worked as a teacher in the past and want to work here as a teacher. But it's not just about that. It's also about the public education system is a part of the prison industrial complex.
Yes.
School to prison pipeline is very real.
Yes, very real.
Having police in schools has been shown to only increase violence that affects
Our kids just
particularly
said that.
black femmes and black women. And there was a case of a sexual assault or a sexual harassment by a police officer to 4 black women, I think in California, only the other day. So we wanted to be here in solidarity with this labor movement and this advocacy for better funding and better resources for schools. But we also wanted to show up here and to also push for more and ask for more. And so rather than doing a permanent event where police are there and escorting everyone, and we and therefore we're hushing and silencing critique of the police. The police are part of the same system that we are fighting against, and we aren't going to get very far if we're halfway fighting an oppressive system. We have to fight all of it.
For sure.
Thank you so much.
That's great. Yeah, y'all want to say anything?
Yeah.
So one question
right?
too is that
He's
I'm
not
helping. I run a podcast, and so I'm helping people understand what environmental racism is about, right? Because NAACP, I think the Black Caucus earlier this year released a report that talked about fumes across the fence line, about environmental racism and how asthma is more prevalent in certain places close to things.
Right.
And so location also determines like the environmental parts of racism, but also school and the type of opportunities and outcomes that happen to that. You want to talk about your work in environmental?
So what we see a lot, particularly in the pipeline movement and in the Atlantic Coast pipeline, first of all, pipelines are part of a sort of system of extraction that usually starts with clear cutting for lumber and then moving in for tobacco and growing tobacco. And then once all of the resources have been depleted, then you either put in a pipeline to extract the oil or a prison. And what happens with prisons like the Atlantic Coast pipeline is they're putting the most dangerous part of the pipeline, which is called the compressor station, in a community called Union Hill, which is a lower resource, historically black community that was founded by freedmen. There are residents that could throw a stone and hit this compressor station. And the compressor station not only emits toxic gases and increases risk for water damage and stuff like that because of the pipeline, but compressor stations also have a long history of exploding. And Union Hill residents have been showing out at Air Permit Control Board meetings and Water Permit Control Board meetings and very forcefully saying, this is not for us, this is not what we want. But because Northam, which is why when Pam Northam came out, our little crew booed, the Northams really want this pipeline to go through and have been very openly and blatant about how willing they are to do anything to make sure that happens. And so it's important to understand that in an intersectional context, because if we're treating Pam Northam in an education fight, or the Northams in an education fight as allies, but we know that they care less about black and brown lives and low-income black and brown lives, how much does their statements about being in favor of black and brown children really mean if they're willing to put a bomb in their communities?
Right. Yeah, and could you talk about how the mistrust with what's going on with the Union Hill pipeline, what's going on with the Navy Hill redevelopment that's happening here? How do you see the intersection between that?
Yeah.
If any of y'all can share too.
Please.
There are
Team
up.
Come on.
team.
It's all right.
I think it's like more about like connections, like so like the like pipeline deal and then like and the Coliseum project, they are like both like being funded by the same people, which is Tom Farrell with Dominion. And so like the Coliseum project is taking so much money from the city, and so that like that is money being taken from education, which is like why it ties in so much. And there's like a mistrust because like there have been like ways in which like Governor Northam has like maneuvered to like make the situation like a better opportunity for corporations like Dominion. So like taking people off of the board that were people, obviously anti-pipeline and like and then not replacing them with anyone else and making it a 4-person vote. Like these are like obviously like movements that are like in support of corporations and not the actual people that are being harmed by these projects, which are the students, which are educators, which are like community folks. It's like everyone is being impacted, especially like houseless folks too. Like it's like all like tied together, which is like why it's important for like, even though like a lot of the work that we do is environmental work, that we show out for things like this to show that like as community organizers like what we want to do is like build a better community. And so that like that includes like having funding for our education, but like also not giving a pass to people because like in one section they're okay, but like in this next one where it's like the same communities, they're like harming them. And so it's like it's very much like, oh, here you go, but then like in the next thing be like, okay, I'm taking it back. Like so it's like, oh, like we care about our future and like the kids, but like what environment are they gonna like have if we're like underwater because like the world is like rejecting like what we are doing to it. So like
and also just like the fact that Tom Farrell is the one proposing the redevelopment project and is funding it and is going to make a bunch of money from that, and then is moving, like Dominion headquarters is going to be moved into that redevelopment zone and is going to get that tax break, and is so therefore is all going to continue to get that money. So the only community that's really profiting is the executives of Dominion, and they're getting to have these conversations where they get to negotiate whatever they want with the Northams around building wealth for themselves and for the state of Virginia, while what that means inextricably is the exploitation and the oppression of Black and brown and queer and trans folks throughout the state.
Right. Thank you for making those connections, and I always helping people remember that children's lives don't end after the 12th grade. Like they graduate into a system, into an environment, and I just want to thank you all for the work that you do, and thank you very much. Cool.
And so there you see, as they were talking about the issues with the pipeline and kind of being sold out to Dominion, the danger and the disenfranchisement, and as we call for the sake of this conversation, the Klan politics that Governor Northam has been involved in. He has been donning Klan politics far before he was accused of donning a Klan robe. And if we're going to be like Coretta Scott King and Dr. King and redefine violence and the legacy of the Klan, the legacy of the Confederacy beyond Confederate flags and hoods and robes and physical violence, though that is still going on, we must then understand how do we resist and undo the work of Klan politics, of people who do not fully recognize the truth and the struggle of African Americans within the Commonwealth and within this country. This is not Ralph Northam, over many situations, has proven that he does not have the competence, nor the will, nor the trust to lead the Commonwealth. And he is giving a rebirth of the Commonwealth, of the types of things that we grieve over this 400-year mark. We talked about, I will also be uploading later a speech that I gave on how did we truly honor Dr. King. And how we truly honor Dr. King is we disrupt the habits of oppression that he warned us against. With the underfunding that's been happening in schools, with the lack of access to health care, and a lot of other things that Coretta King talked about as violence, Governor Northam has not championed those causes. And it's hard to say that someone who does not see blackface as bad as a Klan robe and doesn't understand the connection between that, doesn't understand the difference between how cooning dehumanized black people made way and informed the mentality of policymakers. If you don't understand that connection, you don't have the competence, trust, and will to lead. And now he stands in the place of, when we talk Birth of a Nation, where the villains were black congressional leaders and a lieutenant governor and a black lieutenant governor. The fact that you stand in the way of Governor Fairfax, and I know that there are some sexual assault allegations out of that, and we must allow it a true equitable process to get to the truth of that. But symbolically, you stand in the way of black political power. You ignore the Congressional Black Caucus and the NAACP of Virginia calling for you to step down, saying, well, I want to have a different conversation, was essentially saying, until we have the conversation where I get to keep the power and you don't get to exercise your power. How is that not Klan politics? How is that not the same impact? Though a different intent and a different mean, it is still that impact. Like Whitney Young said, though the intent and the process are the same, the outcome is the same. Black people locked out of power, black people forced to sit under a process they no longer trust, and if they had the right information, would not have invested in. And to not respect the voice of the Congressional Black Caucus, how is that not still viewing somehow the voice or black political leadership as somehow illegitimate? It's time for Governor Northam to step down. We do not want to give a new birth to the Commonwealth of the past. We want to disrupt the cycle of our city, and we need leadership that exemplifies that is competent in that, and has the trust of the people to bring us forward to the Virginia that we all deserve. This has just been a quick episode, and I wanted to just give an update for the people who are kind of outside of the Commonwealth. Definitely, for those who pray, prayers are needed. Definitely, this is a hard time. Trust is being eroded, and trauma is being reactivated almost minute by minute, second by second. We covered your prayers here in the Commonwealth, and let's begin to make the connections that the request of environmental justice activists are valid, are concerning, have been going on way before this happened, and we need to upgrade our thinking to notice that the legacy of the Klan is not just physical violence, but it is political disenfranchisement, and anyone who is partaking in that type of action is partaking in Klan politics. This has been Season 2, Episode number 3, Birth of the Commonwealth, Blackface, Klan Politics, and Why Governor Northam Must Resign. I'm your host, Charlie Ray. Be sure to leave comments and start a discussion. Share this for those who are still on the fence. Governor Northam, it is time for you to go. It is time for us to have leadership that can truly honor the lives lost and the lives that still suffer under the legacy of slavery, Jim Crow, the Confederacy, and the Klan in the new evolved way of Klan politics. You need to go. This is your host, Charlie Ray. Thank you all for listening. I love you. I love you. That's why I'm here. Peace.